welcome to Fish and Rice, Stories from Japan. I'm Tobi.
I'm Andri.
And today we want to talk a little bit about renting and living in apartments here in Japan. And while we were preparing today's show a little bit, you were telling me that the last few days the roof has been leaking in your apartment, right? What happened?
Yeah, I came home after work and after hanging out with friends, and I saw a lot of water on the floor.
In the living room?
Yeah, living room. And at first I thought something happened to the glass because, or like window, it was raining. I thought some rain got into my apartment. It was not. And then I looked up and my ceiling was leaking.
Oh no. Do you live on the top floor from the building? Or?
No, I live on the second floor and there is third floor. I thought it was neighbors and it actually wasn't. There is plumbing in the ceiling, which is leaking, and I hope they are fixing it today. So yesterday I was trying to sleep with the dripping sounds in the background.
The little bucket under the water.
There
leaking.
are three
leaks.
buckets.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how is this being handled? You came home and then you saw the puddle. What happened? Who did you call in this situation?
Oh, I called agency.
Okay.
Then they called the landlord, and landlord called some people. It was almost 11 o'clock. It was like 10:30.
Oh, no.
I was after work. I was hanging out with friends, having dinner, and then I came back home around 10, and discovered that, sent a message, and actually it was handled pretty well because people who were, I guess, responsible for fixing that, they came around like 11 o'clock. They tried to help.
So you were able to reach people that late at night?
Yes, I was really surprised. It was kind of an emergency, and my agent said that it was an emergency, so you have to kind of call people and tell them, or me, or he also did. So yeah, it was very, I think, helpful from their side. They could come in, at least they didn't help, they helped me to kind of check if it's all right. It was not a huge leak, it was just dripping slowly, so...
And all of this done in English or Japanese, or how was this handled?
Oh, only Japanese,
only
unfortunately.
Japanese. Wow.
For me, but I can speak very basic Japanese now, so I could explain what was happening and could tell them if they can get an extra key to come into my apartment and fix it while I'm not there because I have to work. And yeah, they were really friendly. They helped as much as they could. Yesterday when they left a note in Japanese and in English with lots of kind of small funny mistakes. I guess they used maybe Google Translate. Yes, so that was also very cute and interesting. It's definitely not a good experience to have water leaking ceiling, but it was handled in a really nice way, I would say.
So can you tell me a bit more about what your current living situation is? Do you rent? Do you own the place? Where do you live? How long you've been living there, and kind of what kind of place is the place you call home?
I'm living in an apartment in Kobe City, not exactly in the most densely populated area.
But because Kobe is quite narrow, right? You have the mountains on the one side and you have the sea on the other, and in between is like a narrow strip of land where Kobe was built.
Yeah, exactly. So the main area, so to say, is around Sannomiya and Motomachi. It's like the city center, the downtown. There are very expensive apartments. So if you would walk from my place there, it would take about 30 minutes, or you can take a bus, 10-minute bus. So it's not too far. But it's closer to mountains. It's very nice and quiet there compared to my previous place. I lived in Amagasaki, a city right next to Osaka. Very busy, a little bit noisy. That's why I didn't like it. That's why I wanted to move to Kobe. It's a quiet place there. A little bit more expensive, a little bit bigger, much quieter, nicer apartment without tatami. That's what I wanted. If people are moving here, it's really nice to have a tatami room for experience, but for maintenance, it's a
It's a bit
horror.
tricky to maintain tatami.
Tricky is a good word.
So my question is, since maybe a lot of our listeners might be first-time movers here or interested in moving to Japan, when you arrived here, how did you find your first apartment? There's a lot of stories online. You can see them on Reddit or other forums of people struggling to find a place. Some Japanese companies not willing to rent out apartments to foreigners, everything being done in Japanese. How did you overcome this? How did you handle this?
I think with me it was a little bit easier. My ex-wife moved here, so she could speak a little bit Japanese, but we found a agency that could speak Chinese. There are many Chinese speakers here in Osaka and in general in Japan, and me being able to speak Chinese was also a little bit easier to communicate, so I was lucky in that regard. But some people who are moving here, they speak only English or only some of the European languages. That might be a challenge. There are few agencies, and it's better to research before coming to Japan that can help foreigners to find apartments here.
Yeah, that was my case actually. I did find my apartment before coming here, just on Google typed like apartments for foreigners in Osaka, and a few companies popped up and I reached out. They had their whole service in English and you could easily communicate with them, book the place, and it's all furnished because a lot of apartments here in Japan are unfurnished. And when I arrived, basically on my first day, I just went to the office, I picked up the key, gave the deposit and so on, and then I had my apartment, right? So there are solutions available for foreigners as well, which is quite convenient, even though sometimes you need to make some compromise with where you're living. So you moved there at first, and this kind of Chinese agency helped you.
Yes.
And then you didn't like the area so much, so you moved to Kobe. How was the move? Was it difficult to move from one place to another, to change, or to kind of maybe cancel your contract, or how did that work?
My contract was 2 years. It was finished basically, and we just told our agency that we want to move, and it was quite easy, nothing special. They came in, they checked the apartment if anything is broken or damaged, so like general thing that people do. And then we just moved. We used a very small private company that is moving things, so we didn't have much possessions or a lot of furniture. So it was very easy. We didn't have to hire huge moving company, which I know might be a little bit expensive here in Japan. So I've never dealt with that. And yeah, that was my one big move since I started living in Japan. Now, very soon, I think I will be moving once again because of my job, being here in Osaka and me living in Kobe.
It's a lot of commute, about an hour every morning, every evening.
A little bit more than an hour and a half, I would say.
Oh,
so
wow.
I would like to reduce it. So that's why I'm thinking about moving either closer or to Osaka, to Osaka city.
You mentioned you lived in a place that's now bigger than your place in Amagasaki. And what kind of what category of apartment it is? In Japan, they have a lot of these classifications: 1K, 1DK, 1LDK, 2LDK. What kind of apartments are you living in? And can you maybe explain a little bit what these mean and stand for?
Now I live in 2LDK, I believe. 2 stands for bedrooms, so there are 2 bedrooms. LDK together, it's like living room, kitchen, and dining room, which are together, one room
It's
basically.
basically one big room in most apartments, right?
Yeah, so it's one relatively big room and spacious, but bedrooms are just divided by kind of thin wooden doors, sliding doors, Japanese style. So it's not really a room to what I got used to back in Ukraine and also in China, where there is a door, you can lock it usually. So here
it's more open space with sliding doors and
yeah, exactly. It's just one huge room divided by those wooden sliding doors. And yes, before I lived in a smaller apartment. The bedroom was with tatami, which is a story in itself. Have you ever had to deal with tatami?
No, I have not. There was a point where I was also looking for an apartment. I was moving, and some of the apartments I was visiting had tatami rooms, and some did not have. And exactly like you mentioned before, it's very nice, the idea of having a tatami room, feeling a little bit of this traditional Japan. But it's true that maybe if you have respiratory issues, some asthma, they tend to gather a lot of dust, tend to be more hard to maintain, to vacuum them, you need to flip them over, you need to like put them up in fresh air regularly. You can have mites or all kinds of insects like going inside. You need to spray. It can be tricky. There are some alternatives though. You can also easily buy, for example, just tatami mats online. If you want to have that feeling and just have a tatami corner in your room, it doesn't have to be built with tatami. You can have the regular, let's say, wooden flooring or let's call it Western flooring to generalize, and you just buy however big of a tatami surface you want on Rakuten or Amazon, and you just put them there, and you can easily change them out. And I think this is an easy alternative. But I had the same, and at the last minute I was like, I don't know if I want to be dealing with the tatami, and I opted for the other room, which did not have. Although it is beautiful and an image of Japan, right? There's no other country that uses tatami.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of maintenance when you have your own.
My biggest problem was when I lived there during summer season, which is very humid here in this part of Japan. It's not the case in some other parts. Humidity and mold are just very difficult. Yeah, it's very difficult to deal with tatami, cleaning, drying, and you have to sleep there. And yeah, it's kind of pretty difficult. I wouldn't recommend for people who are moving here to live long term in a tatami room or in an apartment that has tatami room. But if you're traveling here and probably renting for a month, that would be a really nice experience, trying to sleep on tatami, futon, and having this really nice experience of traditional Japan. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about like pricing here in Japan. There's often you see in the news coming out, whether it's BBC, CNN, or all kinds of like newspapers, Tokyo, one of the most expensive cities to live in the world. You'll often see Osaka as well on the map. Is it really that expensive? What is your take on like rent prices here in Japan? And can you maybe give us a range of what you've seen for a one-person studio or two-person apartment in terms of like price range? And
it's definitely much more expensive than in Ukraine. I lived in Beijing before. I would say Beijing is really, really expensive in real estate. I was living in central downtown Beijing. I was paying around $500 for a room, sharing the whole apartment with two other people. So it was $1,500, I would say, right? If every room had to pay that.
Okay, yes.
Here, some of the cheaper options in Kobe, some of my friends are renting for about 350 American dollars.
That's very affordable.
Yeah, it's a studio apartment, relatively tiny with a small balcony, place to sleep. Yeah,
like a 20-something square meter, basically reminiscent of like student dorms, but maybe a bit more
a little bit bigger. I've been to student dorms here in Japan, and they're extremely tiny. There is no way to put any big furniture that you would like to. These apartments for $300 to $400. They're quite big, I would say, for the price. And they have a tiny kitchen, they have also place to sleep, they usually have some kind of tiny balcony. So it's not that horrible. The apartment that I'm renting is around $600, which is a little bit on more expensive side. But I have 2 bedrooms. I have an LDK, which is kind of kitchen with dining room.
Dining room area. Yeah.
Yeah. How about your situation? What is your apartment?
I'm also in a 2 LDK right now, although the two of the 2 LDK is a bit strange. So we do have one separate room, which you'd consider the bedroom, and then we have a very, I would consider it spacious living area. And that living area has an area that can be cut off by sliding doors and turned into another room. But I would not really consider it a room myself. You can have some privacy, maybe use it as an office, but I would not really see this as a proper bedroom because you never fully sound insulated or the light, a lot of light coming in, like just moving sliding doors, right? But it's very convenient, it's very spacious. I live central Osaka, so it's maybe more pricey than your current situation. I would say maybe around $1,000 US. We're 2, so we kind of share the rent. And I think it's quite affordable if you compare it to cities in Europe like London, Paris, New York, which are also major cities. The prices of rent will exceed this by 2, 3, 4 times or more. But even Tokyo, right? You see a lot of people, a lot of foreigners tend to gravitate around Tokyo because it has a lot more maybe job opportunities than other areas in Japan. And when you read about rent there, it's usually more expensive, with 2 exceptions, one being like public housing. Have you heard of the UR system here in Japan?
Yes, I was trying to rent one of those apartments, but for some reason I just went with probably language reasons, went with the agency that spoke language that I could speak, so it was a little bit easier for me.
So the UR is like a semi-public, private housing system here in Japan that's like half owned by the government, half owned by the company, and they are kind of very affordable public housings. A lot of older residences built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, which are now being renovated little by little. And they're doing a lot of advertisements as well. You can see them on trains or YouTube videos as well, where they're trying to get younger people to move into these renovated apartments. And those are very affordable, I think. For the size you get and the convenience you have in those places, it's quite affordable. A bit on the older side, the buildings and so on. And the other option to get more affordable housing is probably staying at older places. There's a lot of vacant apartments, a lot of older houses, but you have to deal with a lot of the counterparts of living in those. Some of them may be very traditional, nice to stay at, but it's very cold in winter, it's very hot and humid in summer. You cannot really keep any sense of ambient temperature, because as soon as you turn on or off your aircon or heater, it just changes immediately. You have the wind and noise and like a lot of challenges. Some of our colleagues here lived in Kyoto, and just the pipes froze in winter when it's so those old places are usually more affordable and nice to live in, but not necessarily nice to settle in, right?
Yeah, I hear that some older apartments or even older houses with land, they go for very cheap. You can even afford to buy such an apartment or buy such a house somewhere more on the outskirts of smaller cities. Like in Kobe, for example, there is a cheaper area where people can buy those houses. They need a lot of investment into renovation or just building probably a new house, before that demolishing the old one. So yes, it's possible, but there are many challenges. Yeah.
In any case, like if someone is looking for a place, there are different ranges of apartments, right? You can find high-end luxury apartments. You can find very affordable places, even in big cities, if you're willing to make compromises. And you recommend it to work with agencies. If you're not comfortable with the language, there are English-speaking agencies, Chinese-speaking, and other languages as well. You can find them on Facebook groups or just Google searches. I want to hear a little bit more before we kind of wrap up our talk here today about some of the crazy stories you may have had at your apartments. You just mentioned now the roof is leaking.
Mm.
I have a lot of stories from friends that have very, very thin walls, which makes it sometimes uncomfortable because you can hear your neighbor flushing the toilet every time they go, or slamming the door, or get complaints as well. If you listen to some music, the walls may be so thin that. Do you have any kind of strange or crazy stories with neighbors or things happening in your apartments?
I hear those stories about very bad soundproofing, so to say. So many people say that they can hear their neighbors even talking, arguing. So that's kind of not very good. But both of my apartments where I lived, they had pretty good soundproofing, so I wouldn't complain. I could hear in some cases what was happening at the neighbor's house, but not really. My biggest problem so far, before the leaking ceiling problem, was that there are cicadas here in Japan. They live very short time, about a month. Or I mean, they live about 1 week, but they're like different generations, I guess.
After the rainy season, you start hearing them in the early mornings, like 4:30, 5 when the sun wakes up.
Very early morning.
Yes.
And they're very loud. And they tend to live on the trees. And my previous apartment in Amagasaki had a tree that was growing right up to my floor. I was living on the 4th floor. And they were chirping. Are they chirping? Right there, right next to my...
I don't know what the actual proper word is for the friction of their wings on the carapace.
Screeching, I would say.
Maybe. But it is incredibly loud. If you've ever been to Japan in summer, it's very, very loud.
So at 5 o'clock, around 5 o'clock, during, or even before sunrise, there is dawn, and they start really, really loud chirping or making that sound. I couldn't sleep for 2 years, 1 month. It's about around August.
A lot of hours of sleep wasted there.
Yes, crazy, but I got used to that, just waking up early and doing my things around my house, going to bed earlier, which is kind of healthy. But at first it was really, really loud, right next to my balcony. That was probably the biggest problem, but I couldn't complain about that because it was kind of natural and for some time. Otherwise, most of my experience living in Japanese apartments was pretty good. One of the things that many people from other countries moving here might not know, that almost none of the apartments are furnished.
Yes.
So when you're moving in, you have to either buy your own furniture or get it somewhere from your friends, buy used furniture.
And the tricky part is not necessarily the furniture, but the air conditioning, right? They can be very expensive and you really need them because they serve as a cooler in the summer and they serve as a heater in the winter. And without it, you just either freeze or melt depending on the season. But buying all this furniture and setting it up can be quite costly. So if you move here in an unfurnished apartment, also you need to think about a budget for like how much you're willing to get for this.
Yeah, so it's an extra expense. You have to buy an air conditioner. It was the case in our previous apartment. We lived through the whole summer without an air conditioner. First summer.
Oh my god.
Then we bought a used air conditioner because it was impossible.
You can't sleep.
Yes, it was really... We had a fan and it was only regrets, and then we decided that either renting apartment with air conditioner, which is possible sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes they have just the aircon, nothing else but the aircon.
Yes, so that was the case in the apartment that I'm living now. There is, or was, the air conditioner when I moved. It was kind of number one thing that I was choosing. No tatami, and there should be an air conditioner. So that was difficult summer, but we survived.
But you made it through.
Yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about your experience from living in apartments here in Japan? Some points maybe that I haven't asked you about and that you think are important to mention before we conclude?
I don't know that there are probably many things to talk about apartments for new people who are coming to Japan and trying to rent an apartment, and maybe some trips, maybe some tips and tricks to remember to know. In general, it's probably the best to research about apartments before moving to Japan, before coming here, finding an agency that would help, or maybe a friend. Would be better to have a friend, a foreigner who knows ins and outs here and will help with renting an apartment. Yeah, that would be the main thing, and remembering that there are few rules that are kind of strange or different. There is key money.
Key money, you need a guarantor, which in some other countries...
Yeah, sometimes company can be your guarantor. Yeah. In my case, my company did that, my previous company. So it worked for me. Yeah, sometimes even when you have all of that, some landlords will just refuse to work with you because you are a foreigner, which is considered less stable because you might
go back to your country or
move
somewhere
back to your
else.
country. Yeah. So it was one of the considerations that some people would not work with you or would not want you to rent their apartment to you because you're a foreigner. So yeah, there are things like that. So
there's many things that we can still talk about. And well, let us know in the comments if you have questions, if you'd like us to maybe talk more specifically about some of those topics, such as the key money systems, how much deposit is usually in Japan, 1 month, 2 months. Or if you'd like to know more maybe about life on the countryside, and we can see if we can invite someone on the podcast who has experience living in the countryside. But for today, I think we've covered quite a little bit to give you a first impression of moving to Japan or moving within Japan. Services, you can use agencies. Always do your own research and don't hesitate to ask questions. Thank you, Andri, for answering my many questions today.
Thank you, Tobi.
And thank you for listening. This was Fish and Rice, Stories from Japan, and we'll see you on our next episode next week.